Forget everything you think you know about espionage. Forget the silenced pistols, the sleek sports cars, the shadowy meetings in rain-slicked European alleys. Because the real story, the one that almost broke America, began not in a secret bunker, but in the stale, fluorescent-lit backroom of a small-town post office. It began with a letter. An ordinary letter, tucked amongst bills and birthday cards, sent by a woman who just wanted a pen pal. But this wasn't some innocent exchange of recipes or weather reports. This letter, and the hundreds that followed, was a carefully constructed trap. A silent, invisible invasion orchestrated by the Soviet Union, designed to steal America's most vital secrets. And the only person standing in their way, a seemingly unremarkable postal clerk with an uncanny eye for detail and a gut feeling that something somewhere was terrifyingly wrong. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to step into a real-life spy thriller and her unsuspecting pen pal. He was a wolf in sheep's clothing, a master manipulator, and one of the Soviet Union's most cunning assets. The stakes weren't just a friendly chat, they were global domination. And one wrong move, one missed word, could have plunged the entire world into war. But before we dive deeper, if you're fascinated by the hidden battles of the Cold War, also if you love your family, then subscribe, like, and comment where are you watching from. We appreciate your support. Her name was Doris Annunzio. And in 1960s America, Doris was, by all accounts, just another face in the crowd. She wasn't a spy. She wasn't a detective. She wasn't even a particularly adventurous woman. She was a postal clerk in the quiet, unassuming town of New Brunswick, New Jersey. Every morning, Doris would wake up, brew her coffee, and head to work at the post office. Her days were a predictable rhythm of sorting mail, selling stamps, and helping residents send packages to distant relatives. It was a life built on routine, on the comforting certainty of knowing what each day would bring. And for Doris, that was enough. She was a meticulous worker, organized and efficient, taking pride in the small but vital role she played in connecting her community. But beneath that calm surface, Doris harbored a quiet longing for connection. The world felt big, and her town, while pleasant, felt small. She had a curiosity about other cultures, other ways of life. This wasn't a burning desire for adventure, but a gentle, almost academic interest. She'd read books, listen to the radio, and sometimes, during her lunch break, she'd gaze at the world map tacked to the breakroom wall, wondering about the people in those faraway places. The Cold War was raging, a silent, nerve-wracking standoff that permeated every corner of American life, even New Brunswick. But for Doris, the geopolitical tensions of the U.S. and the Soviet Union felt like a distant rumble, something on the news, not something that would ever touch her personally. She was concerned, of course, like any patriotic American, but her daily reality was stamps, letters, and the occasional lost package. This yearning for connection, this innocent curiosity, led her to a decision that would unknowingly propel her onto the international stage. Like many Americans at the time, Doris decided to seek out a pen pal. Not just any pen pal, though. She wanted someone from behind the Iron Curtain, someone from the Soviet Union. It was a bold choice for a woman of her disposition, given the prevailing climate of fear and suspicion. Most Americans were taught to view Soviets as the enemy, the faceless other. But Doris, ever the curious soul, saw an opportunity for understanding. She believed in the power of individual connection, in the idea that people, regardless of their government, could find common ground. She hoped to bridge a small part of that divide, to glimpse the everyday life of a Soviet citizen. She found an advertisement in a magazine, a small classified section where people from all over the world sought correspondence. She carefully crafted her own advertisement, detailing her interests: reading, gardening, simple pleasures. She stated her desire for a pen pal from Russia, emphasizing her genuine interest in culture and daily life. She sent it off, a tiny paper boat launched into a vast, uncertain ocean. It was an act of quiet defiance against the prevailing narrative, an attempt to humanize the enemy. She waited, not with bated breath, but with a hopeful anticipation, wondering if anyone would write back. The Cold War, with its nuclear anxieties and covert operations, felt light years away from this hopeful gesture. But unbeknownst to Doris, her simple advertisement had just painted a target on her back. His name, or rather the name he chose, was Nikolai. The first letter was polite, almost excessively so. He expressed his delight at finding an American pen pal, praised her courage for reaching out across the political divide, and spoke in flowery terms about the common bonds of humanity. He claimed to be an engineer, working on agricultural projects in a region he vaguely described as Central Russia. He wrote about the beauty of the Russian countryside, the rich history of his homeland, and his keen interest in American culture, particularly its literature and music. He asked about her life, her work, her hobbies, all in a manner that seemed genuinely inquisitive. For Doris, this was exactly what she had hoped for, a window into another world, a friendly voice from a place that felt so distant and often so threatening. Their correspondence began to blossom. Letter after letter flew across the Atlantic, each one building a little piece of their manufactured connection. Nikolai was a prolific writer, his letters always arriving on time, filled with charming anecdotes and observations. He spoke of his love for classical music, his favorite authors, even shared a few harmless Russian recipes for dishes Doris had never heard of. He presented himself as cultured, intelligent, and above all, harmless. He expressed a deep desire for peace, often subtly weaving in sentiments that echoed the anti-war rhetoric prevalent in some circles of Western society. He painted a picture of a regular Soviet citizen, weary of political tensions, yearning for peace and understanding between nations. Doris found herself enjoying the exchange. Nikolai's letters were a welcome break from the mundane. They offered a glimpse into a life so different from her own, yet filled with seemingly universal human experiences. He asked questions about American life, not about military bases or government policies, but about the cost of groceries, the popular television shows, the latest fashion trends. He seemed fascinated by the minutiae of American existence, a curiosity Doris found endearing. She wrote back, sharing details about her garden, her favorite books, her observations on small-town life. She felt a connection forming, a genuine friendship bridging the vast political chasm. It was exactly what she had wanted, but even in the early days, subtle oddities began to surface. Small, almost imperceptible details that, had Doris been anyone else, she might have dismissed entirely. Nikolai's command of English, for example, was almost too perfect. Not just grammatically correct, but idiomatically flawless, sometimes even archaic, as if he'd studied from very old textbooks. He rarely made a mistake, which was unusual for someone supposedly writing from a country where English wasn't widely spoken. He also had an uncanny knack for avoiding specific details about his life. He would talk about my work or my city, but never once named a specific project, a street, or even a local landmark. When Doris asked about his family, he would offer vague, polite answers about dutiful relatives, but never mentioned parents, siblings, or spouses with any genuine warmth or individuality. It was as if he had a script for Soviet citizen, and he was sticking to it rigidly. These were tiny ripples in the otherwise smooth surface of their correspondence. Doris, always a meticulous person, started to notice them. She didn't consciously think spy, but a tiny, insistent voice in the back of her mind began to whisper unusual. Why was he so precise with his language, yet so imprecise with his personal life? Why did he seem to know so much about American popular culture, yet shared so little about actual Russian popular culture? He never mentioned specific Russian films, songs, or contemporary literature, only classics that an outsider might be expected to know. It was as if he was carefully curating his persona, presenting an idealized, almost sanitized version of a Soviet citizen. The shift was subtle, almost imperceptible to an untrained eye. It didn't happen overnight, but gradually, like a slow-moving fog rolling in. Nikolai's letters, while still outwardly friendly and engaging, began to develop a new undercurrent. His questions, once focused on general American life, started to become more specific, more pointed. He would couch them in casual language, of course, almost apologetically, as if merely satisfying a curious mind. "My dear Doris," one letter might read, "I was reading in one of your American magazines, a fascinating publication truly about the astounding progress your nation is making in, let's say, agricultural technology. Your innovations in, for example, long-range weather forecasting for crop optimization must be truly remarkable. How do these impressive systems work? Perhaps you could explain in simple terms for a humble engineer like myself." Now, on the surface, this still sounded harmless. Agriculture, weather, engineering, these were all within the realm of Nikolai's professed profession. But Doris, with her methodical mind, started to piece things together. Weather forecasting for crop optimization was a broad term, but in the context of the 1960s, long-range weather forecasting had a very specific and highly sensitive military application. Accurate, long-range weather predictions were crucial for missile launches, naval operations, and air reconnaissance. Knowing how America gathered and processed such data would be invaluable to a rival power. And why would a humble agricultural engineer need, simple terms, to understand something he should, theoretically, already grasp at a more complex level? It was a request for simplification, a request for a layman's explanation that might inadvertently reveal underlying mechanisms or data streams. These weren't isolated incidents. Another letter might inquire with apparent innocence about the logistical challenges of transporting goods across America's vast landscape. "I understand your nation has a very robust railway system, my dear Doris. What are the common points of transit for materials that might be less common? Perhaps specialized industrial components or particularly large equipment. Are there certain hubs or transfer stations that handle such unique cargoes?" Again, on the surface, a simple, almost academic question about infrastructure, but the phrase "less common," specialized industrial components, particularly large equipment, these were all veiled references to sensitive military or industrial materials, and hubs or transfer stations could easily mean points of vulnerability for intelligence gathering or even sabotage. Doris didn't have access to classified information. She wasn't privy to top-secret government reports. But she was a postal clerk. She knew about logistics. She saw packages come and go. She understood the flow of information and goods. And she knew that these questions, while seemingly innocuous, were drifting far beyond the realm of cultural exchange or friendly curiosity. They were too specific, too analytical, and always phrased in a way that sought details about systems, not just general impressions. It was as if Nikolai was trying to build a puzzle, and each of his questions was a request for a specific, seemingly unimportant piece. The emotional connection she had felt, that genuine sense of shared humanity, began to fray. A cold unease started to settle in her stomach. She revisited earlier letters, rereading them with a new lens. The vague descriptions of his work, the lack of personal detail, his almost robotic perfection in English, they all started to click into place, not as charming eccentricities, but as deliberate omissions and calculated presentations. The friendly voice from the other side now sounded less like a friend and more like a carefully constructed facade. One day, a particular sentence stopped her cold. It was buried in a long paragraph about the changing seasons. He wrote, "The leaves here are turning, a spectacle of nature, much like the changing tides of important research programs your nation undertakes. One must wonder how much energy is expended in such endeavors, and indeed, what fuels their continuous growth." The phrasing "important research programs" and "what fuels their continuous growth" sent a shiver down her spine. This wasn't about agriculture or weather anymore. This was about national priorities, about scientific investment, about the very heart of American innovation and defense. It was a clear, unambiguous attempt to fish for information about America's strategic R&D. The realization hit Doris like a physical blow. The friendly smiles, the shared interests, the innocent curiosity, it was all a mask. Nikolai wasn't just a pen pal, he was an operative. The weight of this revelation was crushing. She felt a profound sense of betrayal, not just for herself, but for her country. How could she have been so blind, so easily manipulated? Shame warred with a growing sense of anger and a steely resolve. This wasn't a game to be taken lightly. The questions in his letters, once mere curiosities, now screamed of calculated intent. They were designed to piece together a mosaic of American vulnerabilities, one seemingly trivial detail at a time. For weeks, Doris carried this heavy secret alone. Sleep became elusive. Her days at the post office, once a source of quiet contentment, were now filled with a simmering tension. Every time a new letter arrived from Nikolai, her heart would pound. She would open it with a mixture of dread and grim determination, searching for the hidden meanings, the veiled demands. Her meticulous nature, once a simple professional trait, now became her greatest weapon. She reread every single letter, cross-referencing phrases, looking for patterns, inconsistencies, anything that confirmed her terrifying hunch. She became a silent, amateur cryptanalyst in her own kitchen. The internal debate raged. What should she do? Who could she tell? The idea of approaching her postal supervisor with a wild tale of a spy pen pal felt absurd. How would it sound? "Excuse me, Mr. Henderson, but I think my Russian pen pal who writes charming letters about flowers is actually a spy trying to steal our agricultural secrets." It sounded ridiculous, the stuff of cheap thrillers. She was just a postal clerk. She had no proof, just a gut feeling and a collection of suspiciously phrased letters. Would anyone believe her? Or worse, would she be laughed out of the room, perhaps even face reprimand for associating with a Soviet citizen? The Cold War climate bred paranoia, but it also bred skepticism towards ordinary citizens making extraordinary claims. She worried about the implications for herself, for her reputation, even for her job. But then she thought about the stakes. She thought about the news reports, the rhetoric about nuclear war, the constant fear of the enemy. If she was right, if Nikolai was truly gathering intelligence, then her silence would be a betrayal of her own. Her duty as an American citizen, instilled in her since childhood, began to outweigh her personal fears and doubts. She had to act. But how to act? She knew she couldn't just stop writing. If she suddenly ceased correspondence, Nikolai would know something was amiss. The flow of information, however minimal, would stop, and he might disappear, his trail going cold. No, she had to continue the charade. She had to keep writing back, pretending that nothing was wrong, that she was still the naive, curious American friend. This meant a new kind of deception, one that twisted her own honest desire for connection into a weapon against her. She began to craft her replies with extreme care, answering his questions vaguely, deflecting where she could, and giving him just enough information to keep him engaged without revealing anything of actual value. She became a master of polite evasion, a silent saboteur of his intelligence gathering. Each letter she wrote was a tightrope walk. She had to sound natural, friendly, and unsuspecting, while simultaneously guarding every word. She spent hours composing drafts, weighing every sentence, every adjective, against the possibility of revealing too much. Her simple hobby had become a perilous mission. She was now actively engaged in a counterintelligence operation, alone, unequipped, and without any backup. The loneliness of this burden was immense. She couldn't share it with friends, family, or even her colleagues. She was isolated in her knowledge, a single civilian standing guard against a shadowy adversary. The relentless pressure, the constant vigilance, the fear of making a mistake, it was taking its toll. Doris knew she couldn't continue like this indefinitely. Her internal investigation, meticulous as it was, could only go so far. She was out of her depth, a civilian playing a game with professionals. She needed help. But who? Her initial doubts about being believed still gnawed at her. Who in authority would take a lonely postal clerk's suspicions seriously without concrete proof? She needed something more, something undeniable to break through the layers of skepticism. Her breakthrough came not from a dramatic reveal in Nikolai's letters, but from her own professional environment, the post office itself. As a clerk, Doris handled countless letters and packages every day. She knew the standard procedures, the weight limits, the types of stamps used for international mail. And she knew what didn't fit. Nikolai's letters, while always seemingly innocuous in content, had one consistent, baffling anomaly: the stamps. They were genuine Soviet stamps, yes, but often they were older, some even slightly defaced, and almost always they were overfranked for the weight of the letter. It was a minor detail, something most people would dismiss as bureaucratic inefficiency or a simple mistake. But for Doris, the meticulous postal clerk, it was a glaring red flag. Why would someone consistently use more postage than necessary? And why older, sometimes worn stamps? She started discreetly collecting the stamps from Nikolai's letters, not just to admire their foreign design, but to study them. She noticed patterns. The older stamps often had obscure postmarks, barely legible, from regions that didn't align with Nikolai's vague descriptions of his location. The overfranking seemed less like an accident and more like a deliberate attempt to avoid drawing attention, perhaps by making the letter seem less important or simply masking its true origin. A package might get scrutinized, but a letter with ample, if slightly mismatched, postage, it usually sailed through. This wasn't inefficiency, it was a carefully designed system. And then one particular letter arrived. It was thicker than usual, slightly heavier. And when Doris inspected it, she found not one but two sets of stamps. One set of perfectly normal Soviet stamps, correctly franked for a letter, and underneath them, very carefully affixed, almost like a second skin, was another older set, and the postmark on those stamps. It was from a completely different region, a region far from any of Nikolai's supposed locations. This was it. This wasn't just a hunch anymore. This was a physical, tangible inconsistency that couldn't be explained away by cultural differences or postal inefficiency. This was evidence of deliberate deception regarding the letter's origin. Doris knew this was the proof she needed. This was her moment. She couldn't go to her local supervisor. This was beyond their pay grade, beyond the scope of local postal regulations. This was a matter of national security. She took a deep breath, clutching the incriminating letter. She remembered whispers, rumors about certain procedures for handling suspicious international mail, about a special department, a federal agency that dealt with such things. She didn't know the exact name, but she knew where to start looking. She wouldn't dismiss this. She wouldn't let her fears win. The next morning, Doris Annunzio, the quiet postal clerk, did something she had never done before. She didn't sort mail. She didn't sell stamps. She walked out of the New Brunswick post office not towards her quiet home, but towards the nearest payphone, the carefully folded, double-stamped letter clutched in her hand. Her heart was pounding, a drumbeat of fear and resolve. She knew she was stepping into a world she didn't understand, a world of shadows and secrets, but she also knew she couldn't turn back. She was about to expose a secret so vital, so explosive, that it would shake the very foundations of the Cold War. Her humble pen pal hobby was about to become a federal case. She was about to make a phone call that would connect her small town to the highest echelons of American intelligence, bringing her face to face with an unseen watcher whose existence she had barely even considered. The silence that followed Doris's phone call was deafening. On the other end, the crisp, official voice hesitated, then asked, "Ma'am, could you repeat that?" Doris did, her voice gaining strength with each word. She was prepared for skepticism, for dismissal. She was just a postal clerk, after all, and her story sounded like something ripped from a pulp novel. But what she wasn't prepared for was the cold, analytical detachment that met her tale. The agent on the phone was polite, almost clinically so, asking a barrage of questions about her identity, her location, and the nature of her correspondence. Each answer felt like another step into an unfamiliar, unsettling world. They didn't laugh. They didn't even sound surprised. Instead, they scheduled a meeting for the very next day. Two agents, impeccably dressed and radiating an aura of quiet authority, arrived at her small home in New Brunswick. They introduced themselves as Agent Davies and Agent Sterling. Davies was older, with tired eyes that seemed to have seen too much. Sterling was younger, sharp, with an intensity that made Doris feel scrutinized. They sat in her living room, her flowered wallpaper and doilies feeling incongruous with their serious faces and clipped questions. Doris laid out her story, letter by letter, anomaly by anomaly. She spoke of Nikolai's perfect English, his vague personal details, his deep interest in agricultural weather forecasting and specialized industrial components. She presented the collection of letters, carefully preserved, each one a piece of her mounting evidence. She showed them the double-stamped envelope, pointing out the disparate postmarks, the older, defaced stamps. She expected them to pore over the details, to gasp at the cleverness, to immediately validate her terrifying conclusion. Instead, they listened, impassively. Davies took meticulous notes, his pen scratching quietly on a pad. Sterling watched Doris, his gaze unwavering, dissecting her tone, her body language, searching for inconsistencies. They didn't interrupt, didn't offer comfort, didn't confirm or deny anything. It was like speaking to a wall, albeit a very intelligent, highly trained wall. Doris felt a flicker of despair. Had she been wrong? Was she just overreacting? Was this all in her head? Then, after nearly an hour of her detailed account, Agent Davies finally spoke. His voice was low, gravelly. "Mrs. Annunzio," he began, "we appreciate your coming forward. These are interesting observations." Interesting. The word hung in the air, a vast understatement. Doris's heart sank. She was about to be politely dismissed. But then Sterling picked up the double-stamped envelope. He turned it over in his gloved hands, his expression still unreadable. "You said you found this underlying stamp with a different postmark." Doris nodded, eager. "Yes, it was almost perfectly concealed. And the overfranking, sir, it just makes sense for a regular letter of this weight." Sterling glanced at Davies, and for the first time, Doris saw a flicker of something in his eyes, not surprise, but recognition. A confirmation of a hypothesis, perhaps. Davies cleared his throat. "Mrs. Annunzio, we receive many reports of suspicious activity. Most are misguided, but your attention to detail, particularly regarding the postal mechanics, that is less common. We will take these letters. We will analyze them. And we will be in touch." He didn't offer reassurance, but he didn't dismiss her either. He simply took the stack of letters, carefully placed them in a briefcase, and with a curt nod, the two agents departed as silently as they had arrived. Days turned into a week into two. Doris felt like she was living in a state of suspended animation. Then the phone rang. It was Agent Davies. His voice was different now, less detached, more focused. "Mrs. Annunzio," he said, "we've had a chance to review your correspondence. We believe you were right." The words hit Doris with the force of a physical blow. Relief, fear, and a strange sense of validation washed over her. "Nikolai," Davies continued, "is indeed a highly sophisticated intelligence operative, and we need your help to catch him." Doris was brought to a secure facility, a place far removed from her everyday life. It was a sterile, windowless room, filled with maps, charts, and the hum of unseen machinery. There she was introduced to the full team. Agent Davies, Agent Sterling, and a formidable woman named Dr. Evelyn Reed, a linguistic analyst whose sharp mind could dissect a sentence like a surgeon. They explained the gravity of the situation. Nikolai wasn't just a low-level agent. He was a control officer, managing a network of other spies, using his pen-pal correspondence as a clever, seemingly innocuous way to establish contact, gather seemingly trivial data, and perhaps even pass instructions or dead-drop locations. Their operation, they informed her, had been codenamed Operation Nightingale. The goal, to keep Nikolai engaged, to learn more about his methods, his network, and ultimately his true identity without ever letting him realize he was compromised. And Doris, the unassuming postal clerk, was now their most critical asset. She would continue her correspondence, but every letter she sent, every word she wrote, would be carefully crafted and reviewed by the FBI. She was to become a conduit, a controlled channel through which they could gather intelligence, rather than lose it. The analysis of Nikolai's letters was astounding. Dr. Reed showed Doris how Nikolai had subtly used her letters to build a psychological profile of her, understanding her interests, her values, her predictable routines. He had leveraged her genuine desire for connection, her trust, to make his probing questions seem less threatening. He wasn't just asking about agricultural technology, Mrs. Annunzio, Dr. Reed explained, pointing to specific phrases in Nikolai's old letters. He was testing your knowledge, gauging your level of access to information, even if it was just public knowledge. He was looking for vulnerabilities, for ways to escalate his demands without raising suspicion. The over-franking, the old stamps, the obscure postmarks, these were not oversights. They were subtle signals to his handlers, indicating the secure passage of a message. Or perhaps they were a crude form of steganography, where the very choice and placement of stamps could convey a hidden message. Every detail, no matter how small, was a deliberate choice in his meticulously constructed game. Doris's role was critical and terrifying. She had to maintain the illusion of innocent correspondence. She had to respond to Nikolai's subtle probes without giving away anything of value, yet provide enough plausible, mundane detail to keep him engaged. The FBI taught her how to deflect, how to answer a specific question with a general observation, how to mirror his language without mimicking his intent. She became a student of deception, learning to craft replies that sounded like her own but were, in fact, carefully engineered intelligence. Nikolai's playbook, Dr. Reed explained to Doris, is a classic example of what we call agent recruitment through unwitting contact. He didn't approach you directly with an offer to spy. He built trust, he created a relationship, and he carefully groomed you. She gestured to a complex diagram on a whiteboard outlining stages of psychological manipulation. First, he established common ground, found shared interests. Then, he moved to subtle requests for information, framing them as simple curiosity. If you had revealed anything sensitive, he would have slowly escalated, perhaps even offering financial incentives, exploiting your trust and goodwill. The FBI team dissected Nikolai's every move, every word. They showed Doris how he used reciprocity, offering seemingly personal details about his life, even if fabricated, to encourage her to share more about her own. He employed social proof, subtly hinting at other Americans he corresponded with to make his activities seem more normal, less suspicious, and his consistent, almost charming politeness. That was liking, a powerful psychological principle designed to make him seem harmless and endearing. His initial questions about everyday American life, Agent Sterling added, weren't just small talk, he was building context. Understanding the mundane details makes it easier to spot inconsistencies in later, more sensitive intelligence. He was mapping your environment, not just your mind. They explained how spies often use public information, things readily available in magazines or newspapers, to build a base layer of knowledge. Then they use personal contact to fill in the gaps, to verify details, or to obtain information that isn't publicly disseminated. The team also discussed the various ways information could have been passed through Doris, even if she had remained entirely unwitting. They spoke of dead drops, prearranged, inconspicuous locations where information could be left or picked up. He could have, for example, Agent Davies suggested, mentioned a specific park bench in a letter, a place he dreamed of visiting, then instructed you to leave a small souvenir there in your next letter, an object containing microfilm documents. You would have thought it was a charming cultural exchange. They explained the technology of microphotography, how entire pages of sensitive documents could be reduced to a dot no larger than a period, hidden within the fabric of a letter or even disguised as a smudge. The double-stamped envelopes, they now believed, weren't just about obscuring origin. The stamps themselves, or the paper they were affixed to, might have contained microscopic instructions or intelligence, waiting to be read by the right person with the right equipment. The Cold War wasn't just about bombs and missiles. It was about whispers, hidden messages, and the subtle subversion of trust. Doris felt a sickening lurch in her stomach as she understood the full extent of the danger she had been in. She hadn't just been exchanging pleasantries. She had been a potential unwitting conduit for espionage, a tool in a geopolitical struggle far beyond her comprehension. Nikolai hadn't just wanted a friend. He wanted a path, a secret backdoor into America's intellectual and industrial heart. Her meticulous nature, her curiosity, her desire for connection, all had been skillfully exploited. She realized how close she had come to being a victim, an accomplice without ever knowing it. The FBI's strategy for Operation Nightingale was simple in concept, terrifying in execution. They would use Doris as a decoy. They couldn't just cut off communication. Nikolai would disappear, and all their efforts would be for naught. Instead, they would maintain the correspondence, carefully injecting bait information into Doris's replies. This bait wasn't sensitive intelligence itself, but carefully crafted details designed to pique Nikolai's interest, to make him think he was on the verge of a breakthrough, and to encourage him to escalate his demands. The goal was to make him reveal more about his true intentions, his specific targets, and potentially his network. Doris would write the letters, but every sentence was a joint effort, a delicate negotiation between her authentic voice and the FBI's strategic goals. Agent Sterling often sat beside her, whispering suggestions, guiding her word choices. Dr. Reed would analyze each of Nikolai's incoming letters, identifying his subtle probes, his psychological tactics, and crafting counter-strategies. It was a high-wire ACT, where every word carried immense weight. "He's asking about infrastructure development again, Mrs. Annunzio," Dr. Reed might say, her finger on a line in Nikolai's latest letter. This time, he specifically mentioned coastal regions. "We want you to respond with a general comment about new bridge construction in a non-sensitive area, perhaps referencing a local newspaper article, but casually mention the exciting new opportunities for transport along the eastern seaboard. See if he bites." Doris hated it. The deception chafed at her honest nature, but she understood the necessity. She thought of her country, of the lives potentially at stake, and she pushed past her discomfort. Each time she mailed a letter, a new kind of anxiety filled her. She was sending a carefully constructed lie, a calculated piece of misinformation, into the vast unknown. What if Nikolai saw through it? What if he realized he was being played? The tension was palpable. The waiting for Nikolai's replies became an agony. Every day, Doris would anxiously check the mail, knowing that the next envelope could be a subtle trap, a new demand, or even a sign that he had detected their ruse. The FBI had set up a special mail drop, diverting Nikolai's letters directly to them for analysis before they reached Doris. They didn't want any unexpected surprises, and Nikolai did bite. His next letter, weeks later, was even more precise. He expressed fascinated curiosity about the engineering marvels of the eastern seaboard, particularly any areas where new, robust transportation arteries might intersect with existing military or industrial complexes. The request was still couched in politeness, but the veil was thinning. He was no longer hinting. He was actively fishing for highly specific, critical information about potential strategic targets. He had taken the bait, and he was pulling hard on the line. For months, the FBI continued to work tirelessly, dissecting every aspect of Nikolai's correspondence. They analyzed the paper, the ink, the watermarks, trying to trace its origin. They studied his handwriting, comparing it against vast databases of known operatives. Dr. Reed painstakingly deconstructed his linguistic patterns, looking for telling idiosyncrasies, foreign grammatical structures, or even archaic phrasing that might reveal his true background or education. It was a painstaking, often frustrating process, sifting through mountains of data for the tiniest, most obscure clue. Doris, meanwhile, continued her delicate dance, writing carefully constructed letters, feeding Nikolai just enough plausible information to keep him engaged, but never anything truly sensitive. She became remarkably adept at it, her own intelligence sharpened by the constant pressure. She understood the nuance, the double meanings, the hidden layers of communication. She was no longer just the postal clerk. She was a participant, an active player in the intelligence game. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, buried within an otherwise routine letter from Nikolai. He was again inquiring about industrial growth in America, but this time he included a seemingly innocuous phrase. Such progress reminds me of the great Glavcosmos projects of my youth. Glavcosmos. Dr. Reed almost dropped her coffee. It was a Soviet space agency, yes, but not a name an agricultural engineer would typically invoke in casual conversation about industrial growth. More importantly, Glavcosmos, while a known entity, was often a cover for highly classified military and aerospace research. And the term projects of my youth, that placed his age and indicated a possible early career in that specific, highly sensitive sector. Agent Sterling immediately cross-referenced Glavcosmos with known Soviet operatives who had backgrounds in science, engineering, or aerospace. The FBI had a vast, carefully guarded database of intelligence gathered over decades, defectors' testimonies, intercepted communications, photographic evidence. They searched for individuals associated with Glavcosmos who also exhibited linguistic patterns similar to Nikolai's, or whose known operational aliases might align. And then, a match. Not a direct one, but a strong lead. A specific individual codenamed Vasil, who had been linked to Soviet intelligence for years. Vasil was known to have worked for a predecessor organization to Glavcosmos in his younger days. He was a brilliant scientist, specializing in propulsion systems, who had disappeared from public view years ago, presumed to have gone deep undercover. The linguistic analysis of his known communications, obtained from various intelligence sources over the years, showed striking similarities to Nikolai's writing style, his unusual idioms, his archaic phrasing, and his known operational methods. They involved building long-term, deep-cover identities, often using seemingly innocuous cover stories. The pieces started to fall into place. Vasil, the propulsion expert, would have a deep understanding of the exact kind of industrial growth and technological infrastructure Nikolai was probing. His scientific background would explain the near-perfect English and the analytical precision. The agricultural engineer cover story was a perfect misdirection, designed to seem plausible but ultimately hide his true expertise and intent. Nikolai wasn't just a spy. He was a top-tier scientific and technological intelligence operative, operating under a decades-long deep cover. The revelation sent a jolt through the FBI team. They had not just identified a pen-pal spy. They had uncovered a phantom, a high-value Soviet asset who had eluded them for years. Doris, sitting amongst them, felt a rush of adrenaline. Her gut feeling, her meticulous observations, had not only been correct but had led them to a breakthrough of immense significance. The seemingly impossible task of unmasking a ghost had been achieved, not with advanced technology or daring field operations, but with the quiet dedication of a postal clerk and the painstaking work of intelligence analysts. The true identity of her mysterious pen pal was no longer a vague Nikolai. It was Vasil, a name that struck fear and respect in the intelligence community. And now that they knew who they were dealing with, the true hunt could begin. The stakes were no longer just about gathering information. They were about capturing a key player in the Soviet intelligence apparatus. The game had shifted once again, and Doris Annunzio, the quiet postal clerk, found herself at the very heart of an operation that would be remembered as one of the most audacious spy captures of the Cold War. The next step wasn't just about baiting the trap, it was about springing it. With Vasil unmasked, the game shifted from detection to capture. The FBI now knew who their adversary was, but they still needed to bring him in. Vasil was operating from within the Soviet Union, directing his pen-pal network from afar. They couldn't simply arrest him. They needed to lure him out, to make him believe that the only way to secure the intelligence he craved was to venture onto American soil, into their carefully laid trap. This was the most dangerous phase of Operation Nightingale, a high-stakes gamble where one wrong move could send Vasil deeper into the shadows, forever lost to their grasp. The FBI team, now fully confident in Doris's capabilities, designed the bait. It had to be irresistible to a scientific intelligence operative of Vasil's caliber, something so significant that he would risk everything for a direct, personal acquisition. Dr. Reed, collaborating with top scientific advisors, crafted a fictional narrative, a groundbreaking development in a new, highly advanced plasma propulsion system, being tested at a secluded, private research facility in a remote part of the American Midwest. This system, they asserted in their carefully constructed counterintelligence, promised to revolutionize space travel and, by extension, intercontinental ballistic missile technology. It was the holy grail for Soviet scientific intelligence. Doris's role was, as always, pivotal. She was to weave this fictional breakthrough into her letters, not as a direct report, but as a seemingly innocent, excited observation. "My dear Nikolai," she would write, "I heard the most astonishing thing on the radio the other day. They were talking about some incredible new engine, something about plasma and how it could take us to the moon in half the time. It sounds like something right out of science fiction, but they said it was real, being tested somewhere out west." Imagine the progress our scientists are making. The language was tailored to her persona, slightly naive, genuinely impressed, and just hinting at something colossal without giving away too much. The team knew that Vasil wouldn't just take her word for it. He would cross-reference, he would probe. So they backed up Doris's letters with subtle, publicly available breadcrumbs. Carefully planted articles in obscure trade journals, thinly disguised as academic speculation, discussed the theoretical advantages of plasma propulsion. Fake classified ads hinted at hiring for a cutting-edge aerospace research project in the designated region. These were all designed to create a convincing illusion, to make Vasil's own intelligence apparatus believe that Doris was, however unwittingly, stumbling upon a genuine, high-value target. Vasil's responses became increasingly animated. His usual cool demeanor in his letters began to show cracks of excitement, of urgency. He started asking highly technical questions about the fictional plasma system, questions that Doris, with the FBI's guidance, answered with plausible, yet ultimately meaningless technical jargon. He alluded to colleagues who were very interested in this development, subtly indicating that he had already begun to share this information up the chain of command. The bait was working. The final piece of the trap was to make Vasil believe that a direct, personal meeting was not just desirable, but essential. Doris, following FBI instructions, wrote about a local open house at a nearby public university, coincidentally featuring a guest lecture by a renowned fictional plasma physicist. She casually mentioned that the university was only a short drive from the fictional research facility, implying a direct connection. She even suggested that she might attend, hoping to learn more about this fascinating new technology. This was the critical move. It presented Vasil with an opportunity he couldn't ignore, a chance to potentially meet a key figure in this groundbreaking research, to perhaps gain access to the facility through a seemingly innocent civilian, Doris herself, who could be used to unwittingly relay information or even access codes, or at the very least, to verify the existence and significance of the project. It also subtly implied that Doris might soon have more direct access to this information, making her an even more valuable yet temporary asset. After a tense period of waiting, Vasil's next letter arrived. It was brief, almost curt, betraying a new level of urgency. He expressed his profound gratitude for her fascinating insights. He stated that his colleagues were so impressed that they felt it imperative for him to personally investigate this remarkable progress. He proposed a meeting, not in some grand, public place, but a quiet, unassuming coffee shop not far from the fictional university. "Perhaps," he wrote, "we could finally meet face to face, my dear Doris, and discuss these matters over a cup of your famously delicious American coffee." The trap was sprung. Vasil had taken the bait, hook, line, and sinker. He was coming. Doris, reading the letter in the secure FBI office, felt a shiver run down her spine. The man who had been a voice on paper, a shadow in her mind, was about to become real. And she, the quiet postal clerk, was going to be there to meet him. The day of the rendezvous was a blur of heightened senses for Doris. The FBI had transformed into an intricate clockwork machine, each agent a precisely calibrated cog. They chose a coffee shop in a quiet suburb, selected for its multiple exits, manageable crowd, and unobstructed views for their surveillance teams. Every detail was meticulously planned. The placement of undercover agents disguised as baristas, customers, and even street vendors. The discreet cameras hidden within light fixtures and fake potted plants. The secure communication lines linking the entire operation. Doris herself underwent intense preparation. She was fitted with a tiny microphone, hidden beneath her collar, and an even smaller earpiece, through which Agent Sterling would whisper instructions. They reviewed her cover story, her answers to anticipated questions, and practiced various scenarios. "Remember, Doris," Agent Sterling emphasized, his voice calm but firm, "you are still yourself. Don't try to be an actress. Just be Doris, but a slightly more careful, more observant Doris. Your goal is to keep him talking, to let him feel comfortable, to make him trust you one last time." But beneath the tactical briefings, a profound personal drama was unfolding within Doris. She was about to meet the man who had invaded her privacy, manipulated her trust, and turned her innocent curiosity into a weapon against her own country. She felt a cocktail of emotions: fear, anger, a strange sense of anticipation, and even a lingering trace of the initial hope she had once held for her pen-pal relationship. How would he look? Would he seem like the cultured, charming Nikolai from his letters? Or would the mask drop, revealing the cold, calculating operative beneath? She arrived at the coffee shop precisely on time, dressed inconspicuously in a simple dress and cardigan, just as she would for any ordinary outing. She chose a small table by the window, ordered a regular coffee, and tried to appear calm. Her heart pounded in her chest, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Every face that entered the coffee shop seemed to scrutinize her. Every casual glance felt like an interrogation. She felt exposed, vulnerable, yet strangely empowered. She was no longer a victim. She was an active participant in his downfall. Then the door opened and he walked in. He was older than she had imagined, perhaps in his late 50s or early 60s, with thinning gray hair and a neatly trimmed mustache. He wore a respectable, if somewhat dated, suit. His eyes, though, were what struck her most: sharp, intelligent, constantly scanning the room, even as he feigned a casual stroll towards her table. He wasn't overtly threatening, but there was an intensity, a wariness that radiated from him. This was not the Nikolai of flowery letters and charming anecdotes. This was Vasil. He saw her, and a practiced smile, smooth and unconvincing, spread across his face. "Doris," he said, his voice surprisingly soft, with a subtle European accent that she had never quite imagined from his perfect English. "It is truly a pleasure to finally meet you." He extended a hand. Doris, heart thumping, managed a faint smile and returned the handshake, her hand surprisingly steady. His grip was firm, brief, professional. They sat. He ordered tea, not coffee. A small detail, but it solidified the difference between the imagined pen pal and the real man. Their conversation began innocently enough, a polite exchange about her journey, the weather. But quickly, Vasil steered it towards the fictional plasma propulsion system. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping, his eyes intently fixed on her. He spoke with genuine scientific curiosity, displaying a deep understanding of physics and engineering, betraying his true professional background. He asked probing questions, not directly about classified data, but about the facility's operations, its security, the access points, the types of personnel involved. He was methodically trying to build a picture to find a weakness. Doris, guided by Sterling's whispered instructions, answered with plausible, innocuous details, referencing public knowledge and vague observations. She played her role perfectly, the slightly overwhelmed but enthusiastic civilian, excited by scientific progress. She could feel the intensity of his gaze, the probing nature of his questions, but she held her ground. She knew this was her moment, her final ACT of defiance. She was feeding him lies, designed to lead him further into the FBI's web. Suddenly, a subtle cue from Sterling in her earpiece. It was time. Vasil was reaching for a small, leather-bound notebook from his inner jacket pocket, presumably to write down some final insights, or perhaps pass her a prearranged message for a dead drop. He was about to fully commit, to reveal his operational intentions. This was the moment the FBI had been waiting for. Doris saw the flash of movement, her gaze momentarily fixed on the notebook. Then the world seemed to shift. Two men, previously blending into the coffee shop as patrons, moved swiftly. One was Agent Davies, the other, Agent Sterling. They were on Vasil in an instant, their movements fluid, practiced. There was no shout, no struggle. Vasil, clearly surprised, barely had time to register their presence before his arms were expertly pinned behind him. The leather notebook clattered harmlessly to the floor. Doris watched, transfixed, as the illusion shattered. The charming Nikolai dissolved, replaced by the grim reality of a captured spy. Vasil's face, a moment before composed, now contorted into a mask of shock, then a flicker of dawning, cold fury. He looked at Doris, his eyes narrowed, and in that gaze she saw not the friendly pen pal but the true wolf. And in that moment she knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that she had done the right thing. The rendezvous, the carefully orchestrated meeting, had concluded not with tea and polite conversation, but with the silent, decisive closure of a trap. The capture of Vasil was a masterpiece of intelligence work, swift, clean, and utterly devoid of the dramatic flair seen in Hollywood films. Agent Davies and Sterling, along with two other FBI operatives, had moved in a synchronized ballet of force and precision. Vasil, despite his years of training and experience, was caught completely off guard. He offered no resistance, a testament to the speed and surprise of the takedown. His initial shock quickly gave way to a hardened, almost resigned expression. He knew his game was up. As they secured Vasil, quietly reading him his rights, other FBI agents, still disguised as patrons and staff, smoothly ushered other coffee shop customers out, citing a minor electrical issue. The entire area was secured within minutes, turning the bustling public space into a meticulously controlled evidence collection zone. Every item on Vasil's table, every surface he might have touched, was carefully photographed and bagged. The leather notebook he had fumbled was retrieved and immediately designated as critical evidence. Doris remained at her table, an observer in her own story's climax. Agent Sterling approached her, his face now softening slightly. "You did excellently, Doris," he said, his voice genuinely commendatory. "Better than we could have hoped." She simply nodded, unable to speak, her gaze still fixed on Vasil as he was led away, his movements constrained, his head held high. He didn't look back at her. The silence in the coffee shop, once filled with the murmur of conversations, was now profound, echoing with the lingering tension of the confrontation. For Doris, seeing Vasil captured was both a profound relief and a jarring experience. He wasn't a monster with horns, but a man. A shrewd, intelligent man who had used her kindness for his own purposes. But he was also a man now defeated, his decades-long mission brought to an end by the very person he had sought to exploit. The reality of his capture was far more impactful than any fictional depiction could convey. It was quiet, professional, and chillingly effective. The FBI debriefed Doris extensively immediately after the capture. They wanted every detail, every nuance of her interaction with Vasil. Her observations, her memory of his questions, his mannerisms, all of it was meticulously recorded. She recounted the entire encounter, her voice clearer now, the initial shock giving way to a newfound strength. She was no longer just the unwitting pawn. She was a key witness, her testimony vital in securing a conviction. The capture of Vasil was not just the apprehension of one spy. It was a significant victory in the clandestine battle of the Cold War. Vasil was a high-value asset, his network vast, his knowledge immense. His capture would provide invaluable intelligence on Soviet scientific and technological espionage, disrupt their operations, and potentially compromise other agents. The plasma propulsion system bait had worked to perfection, proving that psychological warfare, when carefully executed, could be as effective as any battlefield confrontation. Doris was then escorted home, the coffee shop emptied and returned to its mundane existence as if nothing had ever happened. But for her, everything had changed. She had stared into the face of a sophisticated adversary, outmaneuvered him, and helped bring him to justice. Her quiet life as a postal clerk in New Brunswick had been irrevocably altered. She had played her part in an operation that would remain classified for decades, her name never to appear in public reports, her heroism unsung. As she stepped back into her familiar home, the silence felt different now. Not empty, but filled with the weight of her secret, the profound knowledge of what she had achieved. The net had closed, not around some shadowy figure in a distant land, but around a man who had sat across from her, pretending to be a friend. And she, Doris Annunzio, the quiet postal clerk, had been instrumental in pulling that net tight. In the weeks and months following Vasil's capture, Doris Annunzio returned to her life as a postal clerk. On the surface, nothing had changed. She sorted mail, sold stamps, and exchanged pleasantries with her neighbors. But beneath that veneer of normalcy, Doris carried a secret of immense proportions, a weight that would stay with her for the rest of her days. She was debriefed by the FBI repeatedly, her insights and memories crucial to the ongoing investigation into Vasil's network. She provided testimony behind closed doors, her clear recollection of details proving invaluable. Vasil himself was eventually tried and convicted of espionage. The intelligence he provided, whether willingly or through interrogation, proved to be a treasure trove for American counterintelligence. It led to the unraveling of several Soviet spy rings, the compromise of numerous agents, and a deeper understanding of Soviet scientific intelligence priorities. Operation Nightingale was hailed internally as a resounding success, a testament to the power of human observation and clever strategy over brute force. But for Doris, the victory was bittersweet. She was sworn to lifelong secrecy. She could never tell her friends, her family, or her colleagues about her extraordinary adventure. The trust she had extended to Nikolai had been shattered, leaving a lingering scar on her capacity for open connection. She continued to work at the post office, a quiet hero moving amongst an oblivious world. She sometimes wondered what became of Vasil, what he thought of her now. She felt no malice, only a profound sense of duty fulfilled. Her meticulous nature, which had once been a mere personality trait, was now a finely honed weapon. She never looked at an international letter the same way again, her eyes instinctively scanning for anomalies, for the subtle tells of hidden agendas. The world, once a place of simple, predictable rhythms, now felt charged with unseen currents, secret battles fought in the shadows. The Cold War, which had once been a distant rumble, now lived within her, a constant, silent reminder of the day she had stood against it. Doris Annunzio's story remains largely unknown to the public, a classified footnote in the annals of espionage history. She never received medals, never made headlines, never authored a best-selling book. She was one of the many unsung heroes of the Cold War, an ordinary citizen thrust into extraordinary circumstances, who rose to the challenge with courage, intelligence, and unwavering dedication. Her contribution, though invisible to the world, played a vital role in protecting American national security at a critical juncture in history. Her life was a testament to the idea that heroes don't always wear capes or carry guns. Sometimes they wear postal uniforms and possess an uncanny eye for detail. Sometimes they are simply good, honest people who refuse to let the darkness of deception go unchallenged. Doris Annunzio, the postal clerk, proved that even the quietest voice can make the loudest difference in the fight for truth and security. Her legacy isn't written in history books, but in the unseen victories of a silent war. Doris Annunzio's unwavering commitment to her country, her quiet bravery in the face of sophisticated deception, reminds us that the front lines of freedom are often found in the most unexpected places. Her story isn't just about catching a spy. It's about the vital, often hidden, contributions of ordinary people during times of global conflict. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, about all the other silent heroes, the unsung battles fought by everyday individuals whose actions prevented far greater catastrophes. If you're fascinated by these forgotten stories of cunning and courage, and the way ordinary people shaped history in the shadows of the Cold War, then you absolutely must check out this video on right.